In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Thanks, Lisa. Jen Malia is an accomplished author and professor of English at Norfolk State University. Her Infinity Rainbow Club series and Too Sticky, Sensory Issues with Autism explore autism from the perspective of a mother of 3 kids with autism who is herself working through life on the autism spectrum. You might recognize her insights from the New York Times and the Washington Post, or perhaps you've caught her on NPR, New York Magazine, Parents, Glamour, or Women's Day. Jen holds a PhD from USC and is currently pursuing an MFA at Vermont College of Fine Arts. Originally from Pittsburgh, she now resides in Virginia Beach. The third in her Infinity Rainbow Club series, Connor and the TAEKWONDO Tournament, is due out in 2024. She's on social platforms at Jen Malia Books and online at jenmalia.com.
I love writing books because I like to reach a broader audience. So when I started writing, I mostly was writing literary criticism. And I felt like I was writing for just a handful of scholars. And I, discovered that I was autistic in my late 30s. And at that point, my career changed dramatically because, that discovery was what sort of brought me to writing first for popular magazines and newspapers. And then eventually I had an opportunity to write a children's book. And I just loved it so much that, once I wrote the first one, it was like, well, then after that, I kept thinking about, well, what's next? And for me, it was just, I had all these ideas for children's books and wanted to keep going with that.
Give us a sense for what we'll discover when we open the pages of your books.
So what I try to do is, because I'm autistic, I'm writing from that perspective often, whether it's an autistic character or a neurodivergent character. But I think of the books as not being so much about autism and neurodiversity, but rather about kids that are, going on adventures and just going about their everyday life, but they just happen to be coming from that perspective. So the adventures that they might go on would be things like the brick building competition that they have in the first book in the Infinity Rainbow Club series. There's also a augmented reality dinosaur exhibit. So there's a lot of activities that they're doing, and also Taekwondo, a Taekwondo tournament in the third book. So these are just things that any kids might do, but I happen to be telling them from the perspective of neurodivergent kids.
Jen Malia is our guest. We're talking about her Infinity Rainbow Club series. Jen, how did you discover that you were on the spectrum?
So I actually discovered it because I have 3 kids, and my middle child was having a lot of difficulties. Like, she had a speech delay, but she was also having a lot of meltdowns and just like her emotional regulation. There was a lot going on. And I was told by a couple of doctors that she had just a speech delay and that it was a speech disorder, but I knew there was more to it. So I started doing my own research, and hundreds of hours later, I discovered that I thought she was on the autism spectrum. And it kind of surprised me because at that time, my only sort of, I didn't know much about autism. I had only the image of Rain Man, in my mind. Like, that was the only, the Dustin Hoffman, that was what I thought autism was. And so going through all that research, I discovered that it was very different. There was a full spectrum of autism. And I also discovered that I too was autistic when I was going through all that research, and mostly reading personal stories too that I ended up going on to write myself. That's really what keyed me in on the fact that I was on the spectrum, and that was what my daughter was going through too.
You write in the New York Times that you were selectively mute as a kid, choosing where and who you wanted to converse with. Was writing a comfortable communications medium for you growing up?
Absolutely. Writing, and also, I was very shy, but also, like I said, I only talked to a couple close family members. And so for me, writing and reading were what I did constantly. I wanted to read stories, immerse myself in different worlds, but I also didn't feel comfortable communicating unless it was in writing or with someone that was really close to me. And that, to be honest, is still how it is today. It's just that I have branched out and, I'm able to do, interviews and other kinds of, as a professor. But it took a very long time. Even in graduate school, I was still sort of that student who didn't talk much in the classroom and didn't feel comfortable around other people. So now it's like decades later, I'm able to do a lot of the things that I wasn't able to do growing up.
We're talking with author Jen Malia. Her website is jenmalia.com, and she writes the Infinity Rainbow Club series for kids, starring fascinating neurodiverse protagonists. You're a great verbal communicator now, Jen. Did that get easier with age and practice?
I think over time, it just, some things got easier for me, like the communication aspects, and some other things got harder. I think in a lot of ways, I still have a lot of trouble with phone conversations and things like that. I'm not really one to pick up the phone and give someone a call. I'd much rather do in-person encounters or even, like something on video, because I find it hard to just have audio input when I'm doing phone conversations, like as someone who has difficulty with that. So it's interesting how some things haven't changed, but other things I think got a lot easier than they were back then.
The essay section at jenmalia.com is a treasure trove of insights. How do you find time to be so prolific?
Well, I think it's because I don't do everything all at once. A lot of times when people look at your portfolio of work, they're like, well, how do you write essays and write books and teach classes as a professor? And it's like, the key is you just don't do it all at once. You kind of prioritize certain things. So at the moment, since I'm writing a lot of children's books, I'm not writing as many essays, but those essays, every once in a while, I will, pick up the pen and write another one when it comes to me. But I think it's, I feel like my advocacy, it's important for me to reach both an adult audience through the essays that I write and the personal stories, reported pieces, and also, to reach kids. So I do like that kind of, I feel like I have a niche that I'm writing and speaking in, and I want to kind of access it in as many ways as possible.
You write in Publishers Weekly that the company who printed Too Sticky was uncomfortable with the notion of a kids series about autism. Why?
At first, I had an editor that I had worked on with Too Sticky, and we developed that proposal, and it looked like it was going to go through, but she ended up moving to a different publisher, which happens to be Beaming Books, where my series, The Infinity Rainbow Club, is now. But she ended up moving, but it was already in the acquisition stage, so it was still considered by my publisher for Too Sticky, which is Albert Whitman. And yeah, they had rejected the series, thinking that it wasn't going to branch out, reach out, and kind of be popular enough with a broad audience. And that piece that I wrote for Publishers Weekly was mostly about the larger issue with the ways that publishers are often ableist towards neurodivergent authors. So it was more there. My publisher was the example that I was writing from, but it was actually a larger discussion about how publishers need to be more careful with even just like the language in their rejection letters as to how they're, communicating with authors.
Jen Malia writes the Infinity Rainbow Club series and Too Sticky, Sensory Issues with Autism. You can find her books on Amazon and learn more about her at jenmalia.com. Ableism is a new term for many of us. Describe its definition and how some of us may unintentionally discriminate against the neurodivergent.
Yeah, so discrimination against disabled people is the sort of the definition of ableism. And we think of sometimes just, you'll hear things like, oh, that's so OCD, if someone's organizing their stuff, or isn't everybody a little bit autistic? And those are, that isn't language. A lot of people think that, when you start to describe what autism is or what OCD is, they don't really think about when you say things like that, you're kind of just dismissing someone else's diagnosis, if you say that. If everyone's a little bit OCD and a little bit autistic, that alone is a problematic, problematic way of speaking about it. And, that's ableist as well. So we have to watch, I think, the way that we talk about neurodivergence to be respectful of, the nuances that there are, with different diagnoses within the autism spectrum and other things like ADHD, OCD. They're very specific things, and they have both challenges. And I think also, there's a lot of things that I think are important to sort of recognize they're very different depending on how each person, how it's expressed in, different people.
1 in 5 kids are neurodivergent. That's a huge market. But your books also speak eloquently to parents and the rest of the world. How do you write about a specific group in a way that attracts a larger audience?
So I think 1 in 5 is actually a really large number. And I think even the statistics now for dyslexia by the International Dyslexia Association suggest that even 1 in 5 kids are dyslexic. So in that 1 in 5, it's at least 1 in 5. It's probably a whole lot more than 1 in 5 when we look at that statistic. So it's a huge, there's a lot of kids that either are already diagnosed with, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia. They could also be discovering this later, much later in some cases. It's not always something that, a lot of times dyslexia is not recognized until, kids are at an age where they're reading, of course. And sometimes that even goes for a number of years before it's discovered that, in fact, it is dyslexia. And so I think that one of the keys to writing to a larger audience is looking at, there's a lot of common ground too between so there's some challenges that my characters have in my books, but they also have a lot of things that are very relatable to other kids, like working in teams. That's like one of the themes in my book, Nick and the Brick Builder Challenge. And it's not something that's just exclusive to autistic kids. It's something that a lot of kids, I think, would find relatable. And even just the kind of conflicts he has with his sisters in the book. A lot of the things are just, I think, important for not only neurodivergent kids, but also neurotypical kids to understand, because if there's so many neurodivergent kids, there's the chances that their neurotypical kids aren't going to encounter them, out in the world, in the classroom. I mean, it's just, it's not a small percentage of the population. It's a very large portion, as you mentioned. So it's important that all kids have a better understanding of what neurodivergence is.
Give us a sense for how your readers are responding to your books.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of, I'm getting great feedback from, parents, educators, and indirectly, like the response that kids have. One thing that I thought was amazing is I'm getting feedback from kids that they find the books really humorous and funny. And I love that, because it's like a lot of times when people think about autism, neurodiversity, they're thinking about sad stories or challenging stories, but it's not, there are challenges. And there's, my character at one point does have a meltdown and is in his closet in his room. But then there's also sort of the funny moment that follows where his stomach's rumbling and, he starts laughing about it. And I think that that's really the key, that it's not that, they go through a lot of, like I said, adventures or just experiences that are very relatable to any kids, but maybe their perspective is just a little bit different.
We're in conversation with author Jen Malia. Book 3 in the Infinity Rainbow Club series is due out next year. Give us a sneak preview of Connor and the Taekwondo Tournament.
So Connor and the Taekwondo Tournament was a really fun one to write, because I have a black belt in Taekwondo. So I was writing from my experience, but, putting it in the, in the mind of a 10-year-old. And my kids actually also worked on their own Tiger Club black belts as well. So like I had experience as a parent, taking my kids to their Taekwondo dojo. But what's really great about this one, I think, is it's written from the perspective of a kid with ADHD, is like his focus on, he has to really find his focus when he's working on his Taekwondo forms and his, his different there's like search sequences. That's what forms are. And he has to kind of know the pattern and be able to, to remember it when he's doing his belt test. And then he also has this rival. His name's Wyatt, and he's a new character that actually ends up joining the Infinity Rainbow Club. And so this character, he was his rival at Taekwondo tournaments, and then he ends up at his school, and he's in his Taekwondo club all of a sudden. And it's like this rivalry between the two kids. And, I won't give away what ends up happening in the end, but it's like my character, Connor, has to come to terms with, having his rival in his club.
Why do you write?
I write because I can't not write. So it's one of those things where even if I decided, I don't have the time today to write, if I don't write that day, I'm not going to feel good about it. So I wake up early in the morning and I write, and it doesn't matter if I'm working on a particular project, I'll be working on that. So, when I was drafting the Infinity Rainbow Club series, it was very fast, and each one had a certain deadline, and there was always something. And now I'm working on a middle grade horror novel. That's my current project. And I wake up early in the morning and I start writing my pages. I use a tablet. I don't actually, handwrite, but I just love writing. And it's one of those things that I have to do it or feel like I'm doing something toward it, whether it's like storyboarding on note cards or writing drafts every day. I have to have something that I'm doing toward it. There's a lot of thinking involved and writing, but for me, it's something that I feel like I'm missing something, like I forgot something somewhere if I don't actually write. So I can't not do it.
Jen Malia's books include the Infinity Rainbow Club series and Too Sticky, Sensory Issues with Autism. She's on social as @JenMaliaBooks and online at JenMalia.com. You can find Jen's work on Amazon or wherever really cool books are sold. Jen Malia, thanks for a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.